Welcome to the Happily Different podcast, where we unpack the interesting and unorthodox ways people approach their businesses and their lives. The mission of this show is to learn as much as we can from people who weren't afraid to go their own way. My name is Ryan Jaskowitz, and I'm your host, as well as CEO of 12-5 Capital, a non-bank finance company helping companies accelerate the progress they are trying to make in their businesses and in their lives. Today's guest is the founder and CEO of two companies, Medbar and Flossbar, which, as we will get into, are companies that are making healthcare and dental care more accessible to people around the country. Prior to founding her company, she went to Harvard, and after graduating, went to work for Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world. Our guest has been named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, has written numerous articles for Money, Newsweek, and Forbes, and most importantly, in high school, ran well below the 5 minute mile in the 1500 meter. Eva Sadej, welcome to the show.
Hi there, everyone. Nice to be seen and hear what questions that Ryan has cooked up for me. I'm excited about this podcast. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Super pumped to have you on board, and don't worry, we'll get to the running as my favorite thing. But in doing some research on you, I read you were born in Poland and immigrated to Brooklyn when you were 2. Any vague memories of what that was like? You're 2 years old. No one really actually remembers, I don't think. But to me, moving to America is a very flashbulb moment, sort of, as they say. Any memories from that? What that was like?
Well, when your family shows you pictures of you when you're younger and then tells you stories about yourself, you may not remember what actually occurred there, but they kind of implant memories into your head, and then you can see them, you can feel them. So what I know from when we arrived is that I got off the airplane from Poland to good old JFK in New York, and I'm 2.5, and I say to my mom, I thought you were in America, but you're right here. I didn't actually understand we switched countries and that the airplane went somewhere. I just thought we got on it. It kind of went like this for an extremely long time, and then here we were. So I vaguely remember that time, or it was told to me with pictures.
How many of you came over in your immediate family at that time?
Yeah, at that time there's 6 of us. So two boys, 2 girls. I'm the youngest girl in the family. As my mom's a girl too. So anyway, whatever. Parents and
youngest female child. How about
female
that?
child. Okay, got that.
Yeah.
So it was two parents and four kids. Came along from good old Stalowa Wola, Poland, to the big city.
Beautiful pronunciation, by the way. I wish I could do that. So when you were the youngest of four kids, or was there a younger boy than you?
I'm the youngest of 4 kids.
Of the 4 kids. And in what, how old is the oldest? Kind of what were the ages when you came over? If you can do that fast math for me.
Sure. So my brothers were 13. They're fraternal twins.
Wow.
The 2 of those, Peter and Paul, good, Catholic upbringing. So Peter and Paul, and then they were 13, and Albie was 7, and I was 2.
And you were 2. Wow. And so they obviously have much, maybe not obviously, but I would imagine they have much more vivid memories of that trip over. Is that fair to say? Do they help kind of jog that memory of what that experience was like? Do they paint that picture for you?
Yeah, they definitely have many more memories of Poland than I do. And we have a lot of family there. We've got 37 aunts, uncles, and cousins. So there's a lot of people that I never met that they knew and have memories of. So I love hearing the stories. I actually recently made a giant diagram and ran out of paper to make a family tree. And it was just growing and growing, and I barely finished. I hope to finish it someday.
Well, it must be a Polish thing because I've mentioned to you before that I'm Polish. I'm many other things, but obviously the last name is pronounced Jaskowicz here, but it's Jaskowicz in Poland, and it must be a Polish thing where, my dad is one of 12 children, so that means I have 24 aunts and uncles, or 22, 20, whatever it is, plus 35 cousins. So I know a very similar experience to you. And yes, the Catholic upbringing, I think, is part of that. What did your parents do for a living in Poland before they came to the States?
So before they came to the States, so my parents met in college, actually at University of Krakow. And my
cool.
dad was a mechanical engineer and my mom was in accounting. Or economics. I think her degree was economics. And so where they worked after they got married and met at the dance lessons, apparently. My dad worked for a steel plant in manufacturing. I think they're just big construction machinery. And Stalowa Wola actually means steel will or strong will. It's like one of those workers unite kind of towns. So he worked at the main job site for the town. And then my mom worked in the economic development office for the town. So she helped with the grants and government programs.
Cool, interesting. So what have they ever told you the story of what the impetus was for coming to America, to moving to America? I mean, you sound like you have a nice town in Poland. And I mean, obviously a lot of people immigrate from Poland to either, Brooklyn like you did, or I'm from Chicago, big Polish community in Chicago. So do you remember what that impetus was for them? Like, was there ever a breaking point or a job offer or something like that brought them here?
Yeah, so it's not like we were refugees or anything like that. It was just, a couple looking for more opportunity for their kids. And the visa lottery system existed. And we had people in the family generations, like in the 1960s or so, some family members that we no longer can keep track of went over to the U.S. By winning the visa lottery for the U.S. And so my parents had applied, and then they got into the U.S. with the visa lottery system, and that was really it.
That was it. What was the transition like for your parents? Obviously, they're leaving and I'm trying to paint a picture of, I have this awesome CEO on my podcast right now in you, and I'm trying to paint the picture of how did she go from little 2-year-old Eva who came from Poland to awesome CEO of Medbar and Flossbar. So, I mean, that's a big jump with 4 kids in that day and age. Like, what was the transition like for your parents when they got to New York? I mean, and did your dad have a job in place before he got started?
So the transition was rough, but they knew it was going to be rough. And the most important thing in transitions is your friends and family and community. So he had a friend from Stalowa Wola who had gone earlier, Mr. Stanley. And he and his wife were in Brooklyn, and that's where my parents, who went a month ahead of us, they actually stayed with them to get situated and figure out where they're going to stick the 4 kids when they come. Mr. Stanley, he was the superintendent for the building where he lived, and so the property manager had an opening down the street in the other property he managed for a superintendent. So he recommended my dad, and that way they were able to get free housing. He still had to work 2 jobs. My mom still had to work 2 jobs, but at least housing enough for this many children was stabilized, which was really important.
Well, I imagine, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I imagine 2 jobs, working in the place you live. I imagine that instilled in you some sort of work ethic, right? I mean, it had to have at that point.
I mean, you could say I was raised by wolves because my parents weren't home.
Okay. Fair enough.
But yeah, I mean, I saw them working really hard, and they were really strict with the kids. And made sure that when you're being spoon fed, you say, this spoon is for mommy, this spoon is for daddy. And it's like instills appreciation for your family members, and you're doing things for them. A little lovely manipulative feeding of kids trick. But yeah, I mean, they worked a long time. So I saw that, right, which made me see hard work and see the dedication. And then I was really raised by my brother and sister. Really, I feel like I have 4 parents, because my older sister is like a parent, and then one of my brothers like a parent. The other brother is just like a brother, because we're both the younger of the genders. So.
Right. Yeah.
So they're being very strict. Like, I had to go to Saturday Polish school. I had to read the things in Sunday school. I had like kind of like very regimented upbringing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What do your siblings do now? I think you told me way back when maybe 1 or 2 of them work with you. I'm not sure if that's right or not, but where did they sort of end up in this transition?
So my immediate family all went into healthcare. So you see a trend here. So my big brothers are both doctors. My sister's a nurse, and she works with me actually every day. I looped her into this stuff, and she wherever I go, she goes, which is such a blessing. She's the boss after 6:00. I'm the boss until 6:00. And so that's how we run it. And then my parents, when my mom worked in medical billing. So they both took a step down because they couldn't speak English. So she worked in medical billing for medical practices. And then my dad worked in facilities for hospitals and clinics and stuff. So we're all kind of in that industry.
Everything was tied to the healthcare industry, obviously. So working with your sister, how long have you been doing that? Because I work with my brother as well. He's my younger brother, runs our operations team for 12-5 Capital, our client team. And so we have a really good working relationship. I think it follows a bit of the natural hierarchy of things. I'm the older brother, younger brother is working with older brother. Yours is a little flipped. You're the younger sister that is the CEO, that I'm assuming your sister works for you. So are there any challenges there? Did you any best practices for like people listening on working with family and friends and things of that nature?
I mean, I think it's all about picking the right family member, because it could get terrible. I've heard horrible stories. But I think we have this gridlock where she's afraid of disappointing me and I'm afraid of disappointing her. So we both have this like fear of like, I don't know, upsetting the other one. And so in difficult situations, we'll get into a tiff, but it would last an extremely short period. So there's that like closeness and trust there, and like mutual consideration. But, I can imagine if I went into business with some of my cousins, like that would get interesting. Or like one of my brothers, that could get interesting.
I'm with you, and shout out to Jay who works for us. Shout out to Sean, my youngest brother. But like Sean and I are just very, very different people, right? We grew up almost in different scenarios, given that, when we were growing up socioeconomically, we were a little bit lower. And then my parents started doing better in the business world and what they were doing. And then we leveled up a little bit to a little more middle class. And so that's where he grew up, because he was far younger. And I don't know how we would necessarily work together. And that's not a bad thing against him. It's probably says more about me, but no, I have a great experience with Jay on my team, and people always talk about the horror stories they hear, and all I can say is that from the get-go, for whatever reason, we laid out basically all the different scenarios that could cause us to fight or argue, or because you hear the horror stories, so you go, okay, well, what happens in that scenario if we do that? If you end up coming to work for me, or what happens in this scenario? And so we talked about those things, and nicely enough, it worked out that by putting those things out there and having that mutual respect for one another, in addition to what you talked about, the trust side of it to me is so huge, knowing that I have this person who my trust battery is as charged as it can be with, right? Like I know that I can call him at a moment's notice and count on either his counsel or that he'll get the job done, all those things, right? And you can't necessarily count on, like you said, choose one of your many cousins or choose one of my many cousins. Again, nothing bad to them, but I just don't know that would have worked out the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I totally get it.
Oh, cool. Do you go back to Poland often? This will be the last family in Poland question. Back to Poland often?
Not too often, every 5 to 7 years or so. I like it over there. I stay in touch with people on Facebook and see their lives progressing. Cool.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier to connect now that we have all these different social media platforms to make it feel like you still know your family that's so far, so far away. Cool. Well, I have to bring up running. I am a big runner. It's a huge part of my life. I basically only, I have my family, I run my business, and I run. Those are like the three things I do in life. And so it's a big part of that. So when I was doing research on you and I read that you had run in high school, I want to say 4:49 for the 1,500 meter, which is the Olympic mile for those that don't know. I was blown away. I think that's incredible. And what got you started in running?
Well, and thank you for the compliment. I really appreciate that. I definitely ran my little legs off, all 5'1" of me.
Yeah, that's a lot more steps than 6'2" me has to take.
Yeah. So I was good at it in middle school. Like I wasn't exceptional, but I loved playing cops and robbers in the neighborhood. It's like a running hide and seek game across like an entire block radius and going into everyone's backyards and being a nuisance as a team of middle schoolers. So that was a fun game. And so I was always running and hiding and stuff like that. My body was primed for it. But when I went into high school, I learned this thing called extracurriculars. Which I didn't understand.
Not something you guys had in Poland? Was that not something that was part of the curriculum there?
Neither was it in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, like the word extracurriculars and thinking about your college resume and stuff like that. I had to pick something I do that isn't studying. It isn't just like hanging out. So I had to pick formal fun. So formal fun was maybe a sports team, and so I looked at the track team. I had some friends from math class on the track team, so I figured I'd go try that. And where I got serious about it is that my high school is really competitive. This was Stuyvesant High School in New York City. It's a top math science school. So I was good at being a student, but I was constantly 40th in GPA, which is pretty good for that school, but it wasn't an obvious Ivy League slam dunk. It was you're on the line. Maybe if you do some extracurriculars, then you'll get in. And I learned that, from a college perspective, the Ivy Leagues have really good scholarships. If your family is in the lower middle class. And so I would have the choice of, okay, let's get into an Ivy League, or or I can go to community college to help save my parents' money. But if I get into the middle, which is a good school, but that doesn't have good financial aid, then that would cause a burden on my family. So that made me just pound the pavement in terms of running. It wasn't because I enjoyed running. It was a means to an end, which is unlike you. You just enjoy running, I think.
Yeah. It's always funny to hear people's stories with running. And I love the honesty about that. It's it was a means to an end, right? I really, I ran in high school, not very well. I'm actually probably far faster nowadays than I was in high school, which is usually the opposite. But, people always ask me, why, how can you run so much, and all that. And I just that happens to be the thing I like doing. I think most people actually don't enjoy running necessarily. And it sounds like for you, like you're saying, it was a means to an end, but you happen to be good at it. I just find that fascinating.
Mm-hmm. that was really it. It was like desperation to get into college. And I went to college. I wasn't even on the track team, but it helped me get into college. So at least that was good. I swim now. I swim about 3 miles a week, and I do enjoy that. So I do like sports. Both.
But that's an interesting transition, though, because you go from running to swimming, very cardiovascular thing. So clearly there's some sort of gift for cardiovascular activity that runs in your genes, and probably took you to the pool there. Now you talk about Ivy League a lot, and let's talk about where you went to school in just a second. But was that a big push from your parents, or was that innate in you? Was it just sort of natural when you went to Stuyvesant? Where did that all come from? The idea of I need to go to an Ivy League school.
Well, it's actually confusing because my parents raised me to be a housewife. They're confused why I'm working.
Really?
Yes, they did not push me to go to a good school. They pushed me to go to a school nearby so that I could walk or my dad could drive me. That was
okay. And
I'm supposed to marry a nice Polish boy from church, and that's then have lots of children, and that's my life. And I'm fantastic at cooking and cleaning. Very good at that, as well as throwing events. So that's what I was taught.
There you go.
But after I showed some promise in terms of being able to not just be good at school, but really excel. In a big way, they became more open-minded to, me trying stuff. And there's always this Polish immigrant thing of Harvard, best school in the world. You are the pride and joy of Eastern Europe and whatever. So they started really liking that and being proud of it. So, I was not asked why am I doing homework?
Yeah, I bet. So it is funny. You threw your parents a pretty solid curveball there, a nice little plot twist to what they thought was going to happen in life. And running took you from Stuyvesant, running plus you're obviously excelling in academics, took you to the Ivy Leagues. You said you didn't run. Did you go straight to Harvard, or did you run it? You said you didn't run at Harvard, or how did that all go?
I didn't run it, so I got into Columbia on an athletic scholarship.
Oh, okay.
Where I would have ran because I have to keep my scholarship. But at Harvard, I didn't get in on athletics. They just liked the fact that I was diversified and all of that. So I didn't run there. I did do crew for one semester. That was fun.
Very nice on the Charles River there. Always nice, beautiful rowing on the Charles. Okay, so Harvard was great. You enjoyed Harvard and then transitioned from there. And your first job out of Harvard was did you go straight to Bridgewater? Am I right there?
Yeah. I went straight into Bridgewater's technology program.
Okay, and how did that all come about?
Well, so I went to this career fair. And it was in finance because I was pre-med, but then I learned how much debt you're in pre-med. And so again, I made this family financial choice of that being a bad idea. And so people were talking about this finance thing. So I went to go figure out what that is. And it wasn't accounting, it was something else. And then anyway, so I took a bunch of classes in it and ended up at the finance career fair. And so I walk over to a table that says Bridgewater Associates, and I start saying hi, introducing myself, and talking to some girl named Lauren. And she was telling me all about, this DOTS system they have and how you get evaluations a lot and you learn about yourself. And it's a great place for young people to go because they learn quickly and, all that kind of standard stuff. So I took some papers and kept going. But when I came back to my dining hall and my friend Nami was, asking, what did I see at the career fair? Because she was in finance as well. I said, I showed her some of the papers because she wasn't able to go. And she's like, oh, Bridgewater. Yeah, people like you go there. And I'm like, what? What does that mean? Is that like a compliment or an insult?
Yeah. Is that a slight, an insult, or a compliment?
Yeah, I didn't know what to do with it. And then she explained it's because you're blunt. Like you're blunt. You keep telling me what you think constantly. Like you're not very filtered. That's part of your charm, okay? So it's part of your charm, and people like that work there. I was like, all right, okay. that's interesting to
Yeah.
me. I want to meet more people like that. So I interviewed. Yeah, I interviewed for their technology program. Then I fired myself from the technology program and joined their management program within technology because they thought I could code, and I could not code. I took 2 classes in coding and was just like really good at like making a framework on a whiteboard for a battleship algorithm. Like I was smart, but I couldn't actually code, and that was a misunderstanding. So I did that program, then I did their management program, and then I did the investment program.
Interesting. So, I mean, we have to back up slightly for those that don't know Bridgewater Associates. Either it is now or definitely was in the past one of the largest hedge fund in the world. Am I right with that? Number one? Yeah. And then number 2, it's a notoriously forward-thinking hedge fund. So for those listening, if you know the name Ray Dalio, he's written a few different books. One of them is Principles. I'm a huge fan of Principles. And it's not an easy job to get, I would imagine. Like you kind of glossed over the whole, it's a job fair, but I imagine that interview process had to be pretty dang difficult. Was there anything interesting from that process, or was it pretty normal?
Well, I didn't know what normal was, so for me it was normal because it's all I
First job.
Yeah, I didn't know it was normal. So it was 7 hours of interviews. I just thought you do that for every job. I got that offer pretty early, so I hadn't interviewed at many other places, but I think they definitely had less interviews than that.
That's incredible. I mean, for those of us that have like had different jobs throughout, like I've had so many, but before I started the company back in high school and even in middle school, I was, working at the pizza place or whatever. You have to interview at all these, but to think that your like first main job out of college was Bridgewater and that was like one of your few interviews is just fascinating to me. Like from the outside looking in, I find that incredible. Now, again, we talked about Dalio and being a forward-thinking hedge fund. You went through all 3, not all 3. I'm sure there's various different departments, but you said technology, management, and then investment side of it. Did any of that foster an environment of entrepreneurialism, or did anything there spark that for you, or what do you take away from the Bridgewater experience that maybe you use today in your own life and business?
Yeah, great question. I mean, Bridgewater does breed a number of entrepreneurs. Like I see there's been in a recent meeting over the last 3 years, like an exodus of Bridgewater because they were changing some stuff around and leadership and whatnot. And the number of entrepreneurs that have come out of that is a lot actually, or at least very, very much in my LinkedIn feed. Not sure if it's actual volume or what I see.
If it plays out. Yeah, exactly.
But in terms of, it's not like, I would say it's a very entrepreneurial place. It's like somewhere in the middle of that. But the main thing, you learn fast there and you learn pretty good stuff. Like, a key thing I learned that helped me, start a company in an industry where like I wasn't a specialist in, so like not like I'm a doctor or I'm a dentist or something like that, was the idea of being able to manage a team without being a specialist. So I managed a data engineering team. I was not a data engineer. And so in order to do that, I needed to create a structure within the data engineering team where I had my sidekick and that was my like kind of management partner. And then you have to pit people against each other so they debate and have the right person to check their logic and put together something that's formal project plans and keep people happy and talk about their career paths and yada, yada, yada. And so, so that kind of stuff, like it's not content list management. It's like management where you've got a threshold of understanding at 70%, but you're not the specialist, but you're adding management value to a team and bringing it together. So it does stuff. It's not just a bunch of people. It's the sum of the parts becomes exponential. So that was really useful for entrepreneurship. And then secondly, systemization. The idea of taking procedures and numbers and systems and metrics and all of that and putting it together into something that's like a a hive mind where it surpasses, you know, the humans and makes sure there's no key man risk. And that the backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan is solid. That kind of thinking was really, really important. Because startups go up and down. They're in flux constantly. And so being able to have that kind of systematic ethos and procedures, until you know, is really important. So I learned that there.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I always like to ask the question, did you know you were going to be an entrepreneur as a child? Was there any sort of spark early on? How did the idea that you were going to do something on your own, where did that spark come from and when, I guess?
Oh, it wasn't young. Like I never had a lemonade stand or kind of a side hustle of any sort whatsoever. I thought I'd just have kind of like a job all the time that I didn't make. I just sell my time to do things. But where I was inspired is I got a little jealous of my now fiance. My parents are very happy I have one, given the housewife upbringing. I got
congratulations. Congratulations to you and to them, apparently.
Yes. So he worked at Bank of America, and in parallel, he started a company with his roommate. It was a whiskey subscription club called Pour More, like pouring more. Pourmore.com. It still exists. But he had that as like a side project and worked tons of hours at a bank. And then with his roommate was able to build it. And then he sold it to private equity for like not that much money, but like money. And I had never seen that kind of thing happen before. I got a little jealous. I'm like, what did he just do? Like this came from like nowhere, like evening night drinking to like generating income.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah. So I was inspired and I wrote down 40 different ideas I had, levels of reasonable to completely absurd. Just started talking to everyone about them. And then the more you talk to people about a thing you want to do, the more it's likely to happen.
Right. And I love to pause there because what you said a minute ago, which was that you didn't do the lemonade stand as a kid, you didn't, shovel snow or mow lawns or anything like that, which happens to be my story. Like I did those things as a young kid, but I think there's this idea amongst entrepreneurs or people who look at entrepreneurs and go, oh, they've always been that way, or they've always knew they were going to do something on their own. I mean, I've listened to a million podcast, interviews, and that's always it. Oh, I knew when I was 5, I was going to do X, Y, or Z, or I was going to, I was going to start my own company someday, and this, that, and the other. And I think it's important to tell, and this is getting back to happily different. It's important to share this and tell people out there that it doesn't have to be that way. So if you have never had an entrepreneurial spark in your life, if you've never had this idea that you could do something on your own, it's sort of never too late. You don't need to have been that way always. You can kind of make that change. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's like if you want to become an entrepreneur, hang out with some entrepreneurs. That might be the best way.
Yeah. Right. Well, that is the truth. If you start seeing, I'm going to butcher this, but it's like you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Right. And I think it's that ability to see other people. And that's kind of your story of like, see other people make a choice. Then that choice plays out in a certain way. And you're like, oh, that can happen. Somebody I know did that thing. Well, then I could do that thing. But if you're surrounding yourself with people who are just, I don't know, from your story before, if all you surrounded yourself was with friends that were going to become housewives, right? Or something like that, like chances are you're going to think, well, that's the only thing I can do, right? Or that's the only thing I can do. So very important, I think, to let people know that it's never too late in life to take that risk and make that jump, whatever that might be. And I think that leads us to kind of where you are now. So sort of transitioning from how, Eva made her way to this place to your current company, Flossbar. I'm going to call it Flossbar / Medbar. What was the idea that led to, or what was the idea that led to Flossbar to begin with? So maybe give us the you said there was a list of 40 different ideas. How did that one land, and who was your sounding board that said, yeah, that's a good idea?
Well, I liked the name because I went to Dry Bar, which is a women's hair care brand that you clearly use, Ryan.
Right. Yeah. I'm bald. For those not watching the video, I'm bald. So,
and I didn't really brush my hair today, but I went to Dry Bar for an event, and I really liked how they took the basic part of an industry, like just blow drying women's hair and slightly curling it, and made it a big brand, and created it across the country in 70 locations, and I really thought that was cool. And then there's this lady with this podcast. I listened to that. And so I really like the kind of bar concept, the idea to make something simple and scalable. So when I thought of dentistry, it's something that I realized I didn't learn much about when I was in pre-med. And then I learned a bunch of pretty nerdy scientific facts about how correlated it is with your health. And then thirdly, I don't like bad breath. I have an exceptionally good nose. And so it really bothers me. So that it just made sense to me to go fix it. So when I first, so that the company has had many versions, and so call it planful or call it progressive improvisation, to try to find find what sells. So the first version was where we would rent dental offices in the evenings and weekends, and we'd have hygienists to work at night and be supervised via telehealth by the dentist that actually owns the office. And so they can operate semi-independently. They can kind of run their own show there and have their own clients. And then the doctor gets the cases in the morning from all the x-rays and stuff if somebody needs further care, and that's beneficial to them in exchange for really cheap rent. So that it made sense. Right. It made sense, but it had too much advertising dollars needed. Like, we wanted to keep it affordable, but when you're paying, I think the industry is like $180 customer acquisition cost a patient, but our cleanings were $95. Like,
yeah, that doesn't really add up.
No.
The math there doesn't add up.
Yeah. So we switched, took that same concept. It's always taking one concept and figuring out the good concept and then kind of monopolizing on that. So went after the employer market. Yeah. And we did mobile healthcare, right? Mobile dentistry. And that was a lot better because you sell into the HR and benefits team. And then you've got all the patients. They guarantee the patients. So that's great. So then there's no direct to consumer marketing. There's really just, flyers and newsletters and things like that, which are simpler. So that was good. So that was version 2. Version 3, Flossbar then started adding hearing and vision services, because you can use telediagnostic devices like this vision device and this hearing device, and you can cross-train the dental teams to use them to actually give eyeglasses prescriptions and hearing assessments for OSHA requirements at an employer. So then we added that, and that was good. And then the pandemic came. And then I'll pause there. Yeah,
pause there because we got a lot to talk about with the pandemic. But getting back to Flossbar itself, so obviously, just like all entrepreneurs, you choose a lane, then you realize, okay, some of that's good, some of it's bad. Let me take the good. Let me pivot to this thing. All right, some of that's good. Let me get rid of the bad, pivot to these things. You obviously were really good at iterating as you went. When you were going into these corporations, I'm assuming they were large corporations, maybe warehouses and manufacturing plants and things like that. How did you guys do the dentistry? Like tactically speaking, did you go to their offices? Did you take over an office? Was it mobile dentistry, like with a bus? How did it work?
So we had about 10% of the accounts were actually with a physical vehicle. We had about 5 different trucks that we'd go around with, and then the rest of the accounts were just with a pop-up unit. So we'd wheel it into the conference room and set up there. That's about it. So that way, and we went all across the country because we handled tiny accounts, but we also handled large accounts. Like, a company like Pitney Bowes, for example, has 40 locations across the U.S. Well, you got to make a route for your truck. So we figured it out that way.
Yeah, interesting. Because I've seen back when we got rid of our office, I think I want to say 2 years before the pandemic. But like before that, when we were downtown Chicago, you'd see these big buses pull up, and I don't think they were Flossbar at the time, but I want to say like an eyeglass bus pulled up or something like that. And so everyone would come down, they'd get their eyes checked. They could either order glasses, or if they had glasses there, they could just get glasses from that. And I remember seeing that thinking, oh, that's kind of a cool idea. And, especially in cities like New York and Chicago, these buildings have, I don't know, thousands and thousands of people in them. Just, they're massive buildings with tons of people in them. So, backing up a little bit, or not backing up, but kind of moving forward on the Flossbar and the point of this podcast and interviewing you, other than just getting to know you even better, is the pivot from Flossbar to Medbar. I'd love to sort of, in my mind, and you can confirm or deny how this went. I'm going to set the scene for our listeners, but again, we just said you're providing mobile dentistry services. So you're going into these big skyscrapers or manufacturing plants or campuses. You're either going with people in a pod that opens up, or you're going in some sort of bus that pulls up to the building. Everything's going great. Revenue's growing. Awesome. And then all of a sudden, the people are gone. They're just gone. Like nobody's coming to the office anymore. Nobody's in the warehouses anymore. Nobody's anywhere. I want to know how that felt to you as CEO. Now that 2 years later, thinking about actually how you were feeling in that moment.
Yeah, so I was petrified because we were about to go into a fundraising round, and by January, February, I'm most of my time is spent on the sales team. That's where, other than managing, my functional responsibility is. And I was seeing clients left and right delaying how long they're sending back red lines and delaying like when they want their start dates to be, or canceling events, and all of this like in January and February, because there's this pandemic that keeps being in the news, and it's so ambiguous.
Right.
So at that point, I was like, well, hold on. What do you do in a pandemic? Guess you test people for infectious disease. And so I was already kind of geared. Like, I didn't know. I tried to save the accounts, but many of them had force majeure clauses, which means in the event of a natural disaster, act of God, they're then like, we're not accountable to having your services. And so right. It didn't work. So I was already thinking, and I always reserve about 10% of my team's time on R&D, on thinking what's next, thinking what to improve,
right.
In a micro way or in a big way at our company. So when my people had nothing to do, because there were no events, I didn't want to do layoffs. I wanted to figure out how we can retool the team, because we had personnel, we had stuff, we had logistics, we had technology. And so what can you do with all of that? So very early on, as revenue crashed to zero in April, so I was thinking about it in February, revenue crashed to zero in April, following the trend of terribleness that was being signaled in February. I had to do a lot of different things that I can itemize.
Yeah. So, I mean, you were already thinking, I mean, now granted, you were in a healthcare adjacent world. I mean, you're in healthcare, really. I mean, let's call it what it is. It happened to be dentistry at the time, but I'm trying to jog my memory and think back to that time. You're thinking, oh, that's overseas. And then all of a sudden it's in Europe. And then all of a sudden, the first case is in Seattle or whatever. But it moved really, really slow. I have a friend who describes it as, it was like if a building was falling towards you and you were far away, like it looks like it's pretty far away until it's right on top of you. And then it's right on top of you. It's like all of a sudden it's crashing on you. Which it sounds like that was, but while the building was falling, it sounds like you were thinking well, we may need to address this. Is that, am I getting that right? That you actually saw the need prior to the full shutdowns?
I saw the need, and I was already, my head was going there because I had nothing else to do. And neither did anyone else. And so
obviously you're thinking about this in February, thinking about possible testing, then everything shuts down. I imagine at the time you're thinking, well, we should probably think about this a little bit. But you're still thinking Flossbar is going to be a thing. It's going to carry on. And then all of a sudden in March, everything shuts down. And then, like you said, April is zero revenue. How did you reassure your team that everything was going to be okay?
So I got my team working on it pretty fast. I didn't want to do the layoffs. So I had really a participative set of workshops to figure out what do we do? How do we get these tests? Like, what licensure do we need? What does it mean? Can dental people COVID test people? You know, all these kind of like mass amount of research streams that I put into a giant project plan and had people go research, so that, you know, having that path forward motivated people. But for some people, it was too scary. Like they entered a startup that was growing and it was, you know, on a good path, did a reasonable thing, had clients, and then suddenly you're back right on the floor with zero revenue. And it just, so we lost half the team. Half the team just, you know, was like, this is too much for me. I'm going to go do something else, which is fine. We restacked them. So it is what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Cause I remember thinking at that time myself, I was like, I have to be, and as a remote company too already, I just remember thinking, I got to be in front of my team. So we were sending, you know, videos to our team, like just talking about our clients, talking about that everything's okay, everything's safe. It was reassuring our clients that the world was not ending, that we were still going to provide them with capital they needed to grow, or at that time survive, right? And if we couldn't provide that, we pivoted pretty hard for probably about 6 weeks to just helping our clients find the PPP money that they needed. So getting to you guys, I mean, when you think about, I think people maybe they don't forget, but I know you can go to any Walgreens, any Walmart now, or into my personal medicine cabinet, and there's probably 12 tests in there ready to go at a moment's notice. Back then, it was not that. First off, they either didn't have tests, or when they did have tests, you couldn't find them anywhere. So, I mean, pretty interesting how you were like, you know what? You know, I'm sure in the moment it felt like a big overwhelm. When you think about what you were doing before, which was we were going to businesses, to big companies to provide dental services, shifting into COVID-19 testing on a big scale to big companies, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it kind of makes sense. So did you reach out to talk us through some of that transition? Did you call your current, your past Flossbar clients and say, hey, we're pivoting into this, I know you're going to need this? Or was it all kind of new sales and all that kind of stuff?
So to get it started, I first grabbed this guy named Dr. Kusti. One of our clients at the time was US Steel for their dental program, and he was their chief medical officer. And I noticed on his LinkedIn, he'd left, and I didn't know why or anything, but I really liked him and working with him. So I asked him, like, hey, I want to do COVID testing. No one wants to get dental services. You guys paused your contract. What's up? And he said, yeah, like that would be a really good idea to do. And I see how you guys are geared for it. And So I actually hired him part-time as our consulting chief medical officer, because he's built occupational health programs for that's his profession. And so he knows a lot of companies as his peers and all of that. And he has, clinical licensure too. Like you can't just buy COVID tests randomly, at least not at that time. Right. So I needed doctors. Doctors, and then I needed laboratory licensure, and then I needed legal contracts. And so I just grabbed all the people I was working with on dental and went medical with them per whatever their exact skill set was as part of that giant project plan puzzle.
Interesting. So what and I'm sure it's, again, like just like Flossbar, it's probably iterated over the last 2 years, but give us the gist of when a company would call Medbar and say, we need your services. What did that look like? And what would you do for them? Like, tactically speaking, like, would you go to their place? Would you send them tests? What sort of stuff?
So we named it Medbar, first of all, because Flossbar was too dental. So we created a subsidiary, got it its licensure, called it Medbar. And then we started contacting our clients who were either current clients that paused, former clients, or in the sales pipeline. Hey, we're going to do COVID testing. Once we get the tests, like, do you want to sign up for your workplace? And so we didn't even have COVID tests yet, but we were contacting people about COVID testing because we were working hard to get them. And we figured, come hell or high water, we're going to get these tests. And so let's just start pre-sales right now. And then a lot of people signed up, which was good. And we diversified to 10 different suppliers and basically did a morning fish market of who has what tests. Do you have tests? Are you sure you have tests? How fast can we have them? What's the price? What's the price today? What do you think the price is going to be tomorrow?
Yeah. What's the price this hour versus next hour?
Yeah. So we were able to get them just by sheer brute force.
Cool. And then, so how did that, did it follow a similar structure to Flossbar where you would go into these places, or would you camp out in front of their office building? Like what tactically, how were they using you guys?
Yeah. So a lot of people wanted tent services. They wanted us to be outside. It was springtime. So that was feasible. Mm-hmm. So we bought a lot of tents, and set up a lot of, outdoor events. And we even started working for, we were a subcontractor for the ambulance companies in Massachusetts that won the government contracts for COVID testing. So then we helped them set up a bunch of tent events. And so we were just stamping tents everywhere. We did some indoor, but mostly people didn't want, they wanted it for building entry. So you have to do it outside. Right.
Yeah. And so I don't know about New York, but I know here in Illinois, maybe they're going away a little bit, now that, the pandemic has taken on a little bit of a different flavor these days. But your industry really is blowing up. And while you guys are a leader in it, I'm sure there are, as you've seen, there are just a ton of new entrants. For the benefit of your space, the question I always like to ask is, what do you wish your colleagues and competitors would stop doing?
Would stop doing? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, like, I don't know. In my industry, right, there's a race to the bottom sometimes for pricing, or in COVID testing here in Illinois, there was a bunch of companies who took on big contracts and then didn't perform the way they said they would. Is there anything in your industry, and it doesn't just have to be COVID testing, but like mobile healthcare in general, what do you wish they would stop doing? Is there anything you'd wish they'd stop doing from an industry perspective to make it more accepted, or a more accepted way of getting healthcare, I guess?
Oh, I get it. So what I'd hope that they'd stop doing is messing up logistics. Frankly, like sometimes clients call and they've had a bad experience with someone, which is great in terms of, we're able to help them have a better experience. Like we run at a 92 out of 100 net promoter score. We're extremely high quality.
Nice.
And offer really good prices for people. So we're cleaning up messes. Often, certainly made our own mistakes, but are usually cleaning up messes.
Yeah.
But sometimes these HR people get really exhausted trying to manage their COVID programs and just throw up their hands because they're not getting good services. Mm-hmm. The services are somehow disruptive, or they don't get the data fast enough for the entire purpose of knowing the results. Like there's so many ways people are getting burned by COVID services that once you've got them, the amount of convincing and proving that you're a legitimate business has increased.
Yeah.
So because they're a bit jaded.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know the feeling. I mean, we get a lot of people who, we always say you can be cheap, you can be fast, and you can be good, but you can't be all three. You have to choose two of the three. Yeah. And we get a lot of people that come to us where, when I started this business, finance companies looked at themselves as lenders of last resort. And so they hired people of last resort, and they treated their clients like clients of last resort. And that was how we took the happily different approach of saying, wait, we can be different here. Why don't we be a lender of first resort, and let's hire great people, and let's train them really well, and let's make the experience so that it's not about who is the lowest price. Let's make it about who helps me make progress in my business, which are two different things. They're not the same thing. And, part of the theme of kind of what I'm getting from you is this idea of creating a model that fits various different businesses, let's say, within your space. So I love that idea of creating a model and then layering it on top of other industries that may not have the same model that you have. So you've done that with Medbar. What other areas of, let's say, I'm going to assume healthcare, but you can go anywhere, but what other areas would you like to layer on the Flossbar Medbar model towards, that you'd like to see yourself tackle?
Oh yeah, we've got something cooking, Ryan.
Oh yeah. Something cooking?
We've got something cooking. We've got a major technology project that we're doing. We've got a lot of engineers. I mean, since we work together, your people know how much the technology department is on payroll and loves crushing EBITDA. And so
they always do.
We have fantastic technology adjusted EBITDA. Okay, but once
technology adjusted EBITDA, is that similar to? It's not similar to WeWork's community adjusted EBITDA.
That's right.
No, yours is real.
Oh man, don't compare us to WeWork.
I know. That was a joke. That's a joke. But WeWork was one of your first clients, right?
It was. Yeah, it was one of our first clients.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. You've lasted. It seems like you've lasted longer. Look at that. So I love to hear that. And obviously, you got to keep some of this stuff close to the vest because it's proprietary and you're getting into that space. But I just love the idea of mobile healthcare. Like, it seems like such an healthcare in general. It was for a long time and still is in a lot of ways, just such an antiquated thing. They're just now all on electronic medical records, right? Like, just now, like only now do you go to the doctor, and very rarely do you see them use a pen and a paper. Sometimes you still see it. So I think there's such a room to take the Flossbar Medbar model and layer it on top of all sorts of different healthcare areas. And I think it's just going to create access for people that maybe didn't have it, for the longest time, which is fantastic. So, thanks for sharing that pivot from Flossbar to Medbar. You guys have done pretty awesome stuff, and excited to be your partner going forward on that. So we're down to the final questions. I call it the fast four. It's 4 rapid fire questions. They don't need a ton of explanation. Just quick answers, and we'll get you through it. So, other than what you're doing right now, what other profession or business would you like to take a stab at? And that doesn't mean, that's not like my last question about what does Medbar want to do, but like, if you were doing anything else, like, what would you love to take a stab at as a person?
I really like the retail health space. I think that there's a lot of potential for pharmacists to grow into healthcare providers. You visit I think an average American visits them 35 times a year. Wow. I do think that retail health is taking off and has a lot of untapped potential. So that might be coming from me within my next 60 years, knock on wood, of life. So yeah, that's my answer.
There you go.
Huge potential there.
Cool. What is something you're terrible at? And I think I told you before, I don't know if we were recording or not, I'm terrible at being on time for anything. So what are you terrible at?
Oh, yeah, I'm not good at being on time at all. So I am just like you. I'm very easily distracted by something. I think I have really bad short-term memory. If I if I don't take notes or track visually what I'm trying to talk about, I'll lose track. So I have good long-term memory, but short-term, like I'm gonna forget. So sometimes I need a lot of team support for like administrative support to help me have my notes and being able to push through and not forget things that are important to people. That's especially if you're a little disorganized, you might lose some things that are important to others and maybe not top priority in your head.
It's an interesting way to put that. Like, I think for oftentimes it maybe isn't as important to you, but it is important to somebody else. And it's important that you remember that thing. So knowing your blind spots, that's why I asked that question, because I'm always fascinated if people truly know their blind spots and where they need the help. And it sounds like you use your team and, note taking to be able to help with that, that short-term memory issue. What book are you reading right now? And if you're not reading a book right now, what was the last book you read?
Oh, I don't read books. I don't have the attention span for books. What I really enjoyed... Documentary
or podcast or anything like that?
What I really enjoyed is there's this masterclass.com. There's this... the 6-hour course with that guy who teaches you how to be a hostage negotiator.
He is fantastic.
That is top notch.
We'll put it in the show notes.
I thought that was excellent. I'd recommend everyone take it. And, in my spare time, I watch a lot of police dramas and like murder mysteries and stuff like that.
You're like my mother-in-law. Nice work.
If she likes those, I've probably watched over 1,000 murder mysteries. So that kind of stuff, like I really enjoy the kind of like thrilling stuff and useful life skills. It does translate. That kind of stuff does translate to business. So that was like the closest of like, wow, I could see how I can get someone to do a thing using this method.
Sure. Yeah, I understand it. If you need to look at your phone for this, you can feel free to do so. I won't be offended. What's the last thing you listened to either on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever your music provider is?
Oh, I listen to reggaeton all day.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Fancy. I love it. You're like my daughter. So in one way, you're like my mother-in-law, and the other way, you're like my daughter. She just loves... out of nowhere, loves reggaeton.
It's fantastic.
And I don't know where
you just bounce along all day and it keeps you alert. I've got these amazing Sonos speaker system that blasts it when I'm not on a podcast.
They're the best. That was when we realized the pandemic this is going to be for a while. I said, we got to get a good sound system in this house. So I went out and went to Best Buy to see if they had any Sonoses left. Of course they did, thankfully. And one of the best purchases I have ever made. So, well, Eva, thank you for spending time with us today. It's been super fun and educational, and obviously you're an inspiration, and hopefully our listeners can take some things from your story about being happily different and making different choices than maybe the rest of your peers or your industry or whatever you're doing at the time. That's sort of the theme of this show. So thank you for helping us kind of dissect the moves you've made in life and the decisions you've made. So where can people find you online and or get in touch? And we'll put this stuff in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to help anyone who's looking to be an entrepreneur, especially people who are in finance with golden handcuffs and they're scared to do their idea because they're so far in their career. Like, I love those people. So I'd love to talk to them. I'm very responsive on LinkedIn, so that's the best way to contact me.
Cool. LinkedIn it is. All right. Well, thank you so much for the time and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you, Ryan.